To what extent does that pending impeachment, we're not even sure when it might start, does that hang over the markets and business?
Yeah, I think impeachment fits within a broader narrative of there's going to be high drama here inside the Beltway, but it's going to have very little impact on the markets. Let's start with just impeachment. There is going to be a lot of political posturing. We still don't know what the exact rule set is going to look like. We don't know if there's going to be testimony and how the White House is going to formulate its strategy there. But we know the end game, David. We know that there are not the necessary votes to remove the president from office. We know that he will be acquitted at some point after the trial. And so I don't think that the market's going to care much about the different permutations that come out of the impeachment, other than how long that back and forth could delay the USMCA ratification.
Well, exactly. That's what I was going to raise. I mean, the length of the process could affect the markets. Number one, as you say, because Mitch McConnell said we won't vote on USMCA over in the Senate until we're done with that process. And also, let's be frank, as an old lawyer, the longer things get dragged out, things can show up that you didn't expect.
Look, absolutely. So let's tackle the first one. USMCA will clear the Senate. You're going to hear a little bit of consternation from the right. They believe that the negotiations gave away a bit too much to secure Democratic votes in the House. But the reality there, David, is that a good compromise leaves everyone unhappy. And I think that's what we have here. It will clear the Senate. I can't tell you when. All we know for sure is that we have a markup scheduled for this USMCA on the 7th of January. So the earliest possible date for that. And so that's going to occur. And I think that it will clear at some point at the end of January or beginning of February. And then Canada can move on its end. Okay. As for the timeline here, I truly think that Speaker Pelosi's strategy to extend this negotiating period is bearing out some fruit at this point, and that we already have some pushback from at least one senator about what the process will look like, and who knows what this storyline will be in just a week.
Yeah, exactly. The Alaska Senator Lisa Murkowski over the holiday said something about that. Well, what about U.S.-China trade deal? I mean, have we baked that in now? They say it's going to happen in January, but I don't think we have a date, do we?
No, we still don't. We're still waiting on that. But look, I think the phase one portion is done. We have what I've described to my clients as the detente that I think will continue through the election. Look, there's going to be a moment where we get a one-off tweet from the president. Perhaps he's attacked from the left during the primaries or the general election about his position on China, and he comes out aggressive again. But the reality is, I think that we're basically in this phase where we won't see much progress forward, but thankfully we won't see much of the retaliatory spirals either. And so for right now, look, I think it'll be a nice picture when they sign the agreement, but I think that the market believes that agreement is done, and now we've got to wait until after the election to figure out what the next phase is going to be between China and the U.S.
We're talking with Isaac Boltanksy of Compass Point Research. You mentioned the primary season. How much uncertainty might there be for the markets in that process? I mean, how much of a swing could there be if you have an Elizabeth Warren, for example, versus a Joe Biden apparently moving toward a nomination?
Yeah, so here's what has been interesting. We've had 2-3 dozen client meetings over the past few weeks trying to figure out the year ahead. And I think there are a couple points that I want to highlight. First and foremost is I think the Democratic primary is going to take some time, David. We're all going to react, as we all do, immediately and with force after the first 4 primary races. But we've got to keep in mind those 4 are only representative of about 4% of the pledged delegates. It's really Super Tuesday on March 3rd, where you have a third of the delegates, and then the remainder of those primary races in March that will deliver 2/3 of the overall delegates. And so I'm sitting here just saying that we're not going to know the day after Iowa or the day after New Hampshire who the Democratic nominee is. I think it's going to take until the spring, and there's still that possibility of a brokered convention at the end. I'm telling my folks I think that we should know by the spring who is the front runner and who's the likely Democratic nominee, and that will be the first moment where we can say there's some certainty to this story. But until then, it's going to just be an overhang that's going to be a part of every single investment decision.
But that raises at least 2 questions, Isaac. One is, how much difference will there be between the policies of the Democratic nominee and the incumbent, Donald Trump? That depends on which candidate you're looking at. But the second is, if a Democrat actually got elected president, how much leeway would he or she have, given the fact that the Senate, I believe, looks like it's likely to remain Republican?
Yeah, look, David, this reminds me of my favorite quote of all time, which is, you campaign in poetry, but you govern in prose. And the reality is, many of the campaign promises that you will hear from both sides during this election season simply will not come to pass. Because odds are that the House is going to stay under Democratic control and that the Senate is going to be under Republican control. And even if I'm wrong, David, and the Senate flips to Democratic control, it's going to be a slim majority. And suddenly the most powerful senators are going to become those centrist red state senators like Sinema, Tester, and Manchin, who have already shown a high degree of reticence to big ideas like Medicare for all and killing the filibuster.